Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So in his honor and remembering him, we will sing this song. Yashomati Nandana Braja Baranagara Gokula Ranjana Kana Yashomati Nandana Brajabara Nagara Gokula Ranjana Kana Gopi Parana Dhana Madana Manohara Kaliya Damana Vidana Amala Harinama Miya Vilasa Vipina Purandara Navina Nagarabara Bamsi Badana Suvasa Brajajana Palana Sukurlanashana Nanda Godana Rakhavala Govinda Madhava Navanita Taskara Sundara Nanda Gopala Yamuna Tatachara Gopi Basanahara Rasa Rasika Kripa Moya Shri Radha Vallabha Vrindavana Natabara Bhakti Vinoda Ashraya Yashomati Nandana Braja Janapa Yashomati Nandana Nanapagara Gokula Ranjana Kana Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratushe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay. So, today is a very, very auspicious day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's appearance day. So, I will make an attempt to try to speak something on this wonderful Acharya, who is also known as the Simha Guru. But before I speak something, I would like to take the blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas to be able to try to speak on this most exalted Acharya. Whatever I speak, whatever words that may come out from my mouth, let it be in the right mood and spirit of pleasing all the Vaishnavas, of pleasing the Lordships, Sri Sri Nitai Gaurachandra, and let me speak for your pleasure. So, before that, we will also just chant the Pranati Mantra for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So, I request all of you all to please repeat after me. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati iti namine Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayine Prabhave Namaha Madhurya Ujjvala Premadhya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namastute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dhvanta Harine Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur ki Jai. So, this class will specifically be in English. The reason being is it was Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's desire, whom he expressed to Srila Prabhupada, that he will preach that this message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu should be preached in the English language. So, following in the footsteps of, and the instruction of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. So, this will be specifically in English. For those who want Hindi translation, maybe we can make some alternative arrangement. So, but this will be in English itself. So, first let us try to understand who is an Acharya. So, in one lecture of His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, when he compares an Acharya to a spiritual warrior. Why does he compare an Acharya to a spiritual warrior? Because a warrior is one who fights. What is he? Okay, when I'm talking about a fight, I'm not referring to a fight which causes bloodshed. But when an Acharya fights to cut through all the misconceptions that evolve in a society, especially in a spiritual society. And when an Acharya appears, he does not take birth. He appears, he cuts through all the misconceptions that people have and gives them a glimpse of Krishna's beauty. And this, so that the living entity can naturally get attracted to Krishna. So this is what is an Acharya. So a spiritual warrior, what is his duty? His duty is to, like any other warrior, a warrior normally fights a war. So even an Acharya, he also fights a war. What kind of war does he fight? He fights a war against illusion. And what is the purpose of the war? In the course of fighting a war, there are certain strategies, there are certain practices, which he may employ against his enemies. So in a very, very similar manner, our acharyas, who are like spiritual warriors, according to time, place, and circumstances, they also employ different strategies. They also employ different ways and means through which they try to reach the message of Krishna to the conditioned souls. Like for example, in the World War, like in World War I, the strategy that was used to defeat the enemy was called the trench warfare. Now, what do you mean by trench warfare? People would build tunnels, below the ground, and then they would suddenly go into the tunnels and suddenly appear from nowhere and attack the enemy. But if this same strategy was applied in World War II, it would not have worked. It would be just, digging your own grave. Rather, because the reason being, in World War II, the concept of planes came about, where people would attack from the air. So therefore, different strategies, the purpose is same. You want to fight a war, you want to achieve victory over your enemy, but the ways and means, the strategies through which you conquer your enemy differs from time, place, and circumstance. So in a very similar manner, our acharyas also have adopted strategies and ways and means by which this message of Krishna consciousness can reach to the conditioned living conditioned souls. So this is a very, very important point that we need to understand. So even in our own practice of Krishna consciousness, we also apply different strategies by the virtue of which we can fight against Maya. For example, the internet. The internet can be an aid or an help for a person who wants to find material for preaching. But that same internet can be a pitfall for those who do not have their senses under control. But that same internet can prove to be a boon, or it can even prove to be a curse. It all depends upon the user. And therefore, different strategies has to be used by the practitioners in order to deal with internet. For simple example. So therefore, even our acharyas have also done the same thing. So this is an acharya he's a spiritual warfare, and who helps us fight against illusion. And we see each and every acharya, right, starting from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through the Goswamis, coming down the line, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada. Their prayojan was same. Their goal was same. But the abhidheya they followed in fighting the war against Maya, they were quite different. So based on this, today we will discuss 5 aspects of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's outreach. 5 things, 5 aspects. The first aspect that we will discuss about is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's introduction of the sannyas ashram. First. Second, we will talk about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's giving the right understanding of what is the Rag Marg. Third aspect that we will talk about is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's introduction of institutionalization. The fourth topic that we will be talking about is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's use of technology. And the fifth that we will be talking about is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's use of contemporary language, and especially English. So these are the 5 aspects that we will talk about as a part of this discussion. Most of the the content which I used for preparation for this class was, the book by Bhakti Vikas Maharaj. And also there's a very beautiful book on the lives and precepts. So I was doing a lot of research and, I tried to assimilate and, try to compile what I could, for this particular, presentation on this, on our glorious Acharya Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he not only reintroduced sannyas into Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but he brought about many, many radical changes, And one of the most radical change that one can think of, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the first Acharya, in any of the sampradayas to give himself sannyas. This was something so unique. This was something not seen anywhere. Why did he do such a thing? Like many devotees sitting here are waiting for initiation. Many may think, initiation is taking so long. Why should I wait for initiation? Why not give initiation to myself? That was something which, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur did. He gave sannyas initiation to himself. So we will see, what was the reason for it? Why did he take such a stand? So of course the reasons are multifold. But before such a radical change that he adopted, we first need to understand that why sannyas was not there prior to that. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, but after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, down the para, there was practically no one who took sannyas. And we need to understand this why. So there is a verse in the Brahma Vaivarta Puran, wherein it is clearly mentioned that sannyas is banned. Sannyas is not allowed in the age of Kali Yuga. Even though Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself took it, of course there are also various statements in the same Brahma Vaivarta Puran which states that yes, sannyas can be taken. So of course there's not a blanket ban on taking sannyas, but the essence has to be understood. So therefore, if you see, even amongst Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's followers, there were two divisions. Especially in Bengal, Mahaprabhu had followers like, Grahastha followers like Ramanand Rai, Advaita Acharya, Srinivas Acharya. And then the other division, he had followers in Vrindavan who were basically renunciates. And amongst them, the primary renunciates were whom? The 6 Goswamis. The 6 Goswamis. So, if you see, the Goswamis, especially in Vrindavan, the head of the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the head of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas were primarily 2 devotees. That were Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami. Gaudiya Vaishnavism after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were headed by these 2 primary devotees. So, even though the Goswamis themselves were born in Saraswat Brahman families, but when they came in touch with Nawab Hussain Shah and they converted into Islam, they were considered as rejects. Oh, now you have been contaminated, you have been polluted, and therefore you can no longer, be accepted as a part. You can no longer be accepted as a Brahmana. So, if traditional communities would not have accepted Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami into their, would not accept them into the mainstream society. So therefore, Sanatan Goswami and Rupa Goswami, took an alternative form of renunciation. And what was the alternative form of renunciation at that point of time? It was the Babaji Vesh. It was the Babaji Vesh. Of course, Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, they were much more than sannyasis. That is why whenever Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami were approached for initiations, by different people who took inspiration from him, they were directed to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Why? Because Gopal Bhatta Goswami was born in a Brahman family from Srirangam. So therefore, Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, many devotees approached them, please give us initiation. But they would purposely direct them to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Oh, he is more eligible to give you initiations. So therefore you see, the Goswamis themselves and even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself did not go against the traditional, the traditional communities, they never went against them. And rather, Mahaprabhu showed all respect towards them. But at the same time, we understand that Goswamis, even they did not externally take sannyas, their spirit was that of a true sannyasi. And practically, what to speak of a sannyasi, they were much more than a sannyasi. There is a very famous, verse, in the Shat Goswami Ashtakam. Tyaktva turnam ashesha mandalam pati shrenim sadha tuchhavat bhutva dina ganesha kau karunaya kaupin kanthashrito. So externally they might be very poor. They may look very, very poor. But internally they were rich. And how do we understand? By the last two lines. Gopi bhava amrita labdhi lahari kalola muhur vande rupa sanatana raghu yogo shri jiva gopalago. So they were internally frolicking. Their hearts were exploding with their consciousness submerged into the deep loving ecstasies of the gopis of Vrindavan. And they were constantly bathing into that. So these were the Goswamis of, Vrindavan. So for them, it really did not matter whether taking sannyas or not. So this was one. And then when Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, now they did not take sannyas. So therefore the other followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who were in Vrindavan, they thought, if Sanatan Goswami and Rupa Goswami are taking sannyas, then who are we? We are no one. So therefore, they also following Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, those acharyas in the line, they also took Babaji Vesh. So this was, this is how it went on. And this went on for several generations. And by the time Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur appeared in this world, there were several contaminations that came. Several contaminations that came into Parampara, which, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur appeared to remove all those contaminations and uproot it. So this is, one understanding that is given, that is given here. What is the understanding? The understanding is why there was no sannyas ashram, because the traditional communities at that point of time in society would not have accepted, the Rup Goswami and Sanatan Goswami at that point of time. And following in their footsteps, the other acharyas in our line also did not accept sannyas. So therefore, over generations, the devotees, the acharyas took Babaji Vesh. So this is the point that we need to understand. Now, what were these contaminations that came about in Gaudiya Vaishnavism? That is what we'll try to understand, and how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur so expertly, dealt with them. Before that, let us try to understand something. So, in the Vedic tradition, there are two ways to approach God. One way of approaching God is the Upanishadic style. Now, what do you mean by the Upanishad style? Where you approach God, you approach spirit by going away from matter. Understood? You approach spirit by going away from matter. And the Upanishad style of presentation is neti, 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 neti. You defy matter, you deny matter, so that you go towards spirit. But what is the problem in such an approach? Not everyone can take such an approach. Especially this kind of approach, the Upanishadic style of approach of understanding Krishna or understanding God is only could be adopted by the intellectual class of people. But what about ordinary people like us? For them it was very, 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 very difficult. So therefore, what was the alternative form? The alternative form were the tantras. Now, if you have read Srila Prabhupada's purports, you will see Prabhupada quoting many a times from Tantra Shastras. If you must have heard about the Vishnu Yamala Tantra, the Vaishnava Tantra. Prabhupada many times in Bhagavad Gita has quoted from Saratya Tantra. So now what is exactly Tantra? So Tantras are a class of literatures which instruct us, the Vedantas tell us you have to go away from matter in order to approach spirit. But the Tantra Shastras tell us how you can use matter, to be able to approach spirit. You understood this principle? This is a very, very important aspect of it. So Tantra, the basic principle of Tantra, do not reject matter, but use matter as a ways and means by the virtue of which you can approach spirit. And so therefore, there are two classifications of a Tantra. So please, have patience, because it's going to be a little technical. So you have the right-handed Tantra and you have the left-handed Tantra. Now what do you mean by right-handed, left-handed Tantra? So right-handed Tantra is scriptural based. And left-handed Tantra is basically a perverted reflection of the right-handed Tantra. So what do you mean by right-handed Tantra? So right-handed Tantra, like the basic principle of a Tantra is using matter in order to be able to access spirit. So can you give me a classical example of this? How do you use matter? Deity worship. So deity worship, which deity worship is a means by the virtue of which you use the elements of the earth in order to able to approach Krishna. Where Krishna is giving us an opportunity to reciprocate with him. So this is the right-handed Tantra. And therefore, the same Vaishnava Tantras, and also this becomes also, with the Tantra Shastras, this also gives us access, to the dhams, to the auspicious elements which are used to make the beads, like the tulsi beads. So even though externally they are material, but this is a ways and means through which we can approach Krishna. So therefore our acharyas follow what is called as Vaishnava Vedanta. Vaishnava Vedanta means, yes, we acknowledge the fact that you have to go away from matter. You have to go towards spirit, but you use matter in order to be able to go towards spirit. So this is what is called, the right-handed Tantra principle. And the same right-handed Tantra scriptures, of course, which is scriptural based, even warns us that you cannot use all matter. You cannot use all material activities to be able to engage in Krishna service. This is one important principle. And that is where left-handed Tantra comes into place. Now what does left-handed Tantra say? Of course, this is concocted, by people saying that, oh, wonderful. You use all matter, all activities, it can be engaged in Krishna service. And the most perverted and perverted reflection of it, is the male and female union. So what do they say? Oh, in the male, Lord Shiva has descended, and in the female, Parvati has descended, and through them they are performing their divine Leela. So this was unfortunately the most, perverted form of the Vedic tradition, which was something which crept in. So it crept in. So this left-handed Tantra, it first crept into Buddhism. Buddhism. So now Buddha was such a personality, he had renounced everything completely. Everything completely. And for followers of Buddhism, especially Lord Buddha, they found it difficult. So therefore, what did they concoct? The followers in the 15th, in 15 AD said that, oh, Buddha came into our dreams. And what did Buddha tell us? Oh, those followers who were there at my time were not so advanced. But you people are very advanced. So therefore, you can associate, with the opposite sex. And that is where all this perversion came into. And then after that, this concept became so popular that it also crept into Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now what replaced Shiva and Parvati was Radha and Krishna. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism means Radha and Krishna. So yes, Radha and Krishna have entered you, and through them and through you they are performing their divine Leela. So this is what exactly happened. And when such popular thoughts were being expressed in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that is where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur thought, oh, who are these people who are propagating these thoughts? They are the Babajis themselves. And therefore, to have a respectable presentation of Krishna consciousness in the Babaji Vesh was not the best thing at that point of time. So therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood that sannyas has to be brought back in. Everyone clear? I hope no confusion at this point of time. So what was the purpose of taking sannyas? Also, at that point of time, there were no genuine sannyasis, because there were only Babajis. And even at that point of time, the respectable Babajis were Bhajananandis. No, they did not accept disciples. And those who wanted to give initiation very desperately, they were not respected in the mainstream society at all, because they were known to have illicit connection with the women. So this was unfortunate. But there were also the devotees from the Madhva Sampradaya and Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur could have taken sannyas from there also, but no. They had very, very rigid principles. Their principle was that they can only accept those, they can give initiation to only those who come from high caste Brahmin families. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was not from a lineage of Brahmana, high caste Brahmana family. And also Mayavad, he could have taken sannyas from Mayavad sannyasis, but that would defeat the entire purpose. Because his existence, his appearance was for the purpose of defeating and refuting Mayavad. So that also was not an option for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So therefore, what is the only option left? He, in front of his beloved spiritual master, he took sannyas initiation. So this is, what we need to understand. So this was another aspect of, so the very reason for taking to sannyas ashram, then the Babaji Vesh, was to bring back respectability of the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. To bring back that same prestige and respectability of that message. So that is why, once again, he reintroduced the sannyas ashram. So this is the first aspect of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's outreach. Clear? Yes? No confusion, no doubts, no queries, no comments, hopefully. Yes? Okay. So now the second aspect is his bringing about a revolutionary understanding of what is Rag Marg. So for those who do not know what is Rag Marg, so just give you this. I'm not giving you a Bhakti Shastri class here on Raganuga Bhakti, but just a brief understanding. So basically, Rag Marg is the path of loving attachment. A very advanced devotee, when he understands his or hers, rasa, like for example, if a devotee, has it. So basically, Raganuga Bhakti is the path where a devotee follows in the footsteps of a Vrajvasi. For example, if a person is in Vatsalya Ras, so for a person in Vatsalya Ras, his role model will be Yashodamai. So there is a very beautiful book by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj called Govinda Leelamrit, wherein Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj, tells at what time, where and when, what pastime of Krishna is taking place. So a person taking up, a person who is following the Rag Marg, he meditates, he is in he is on this earth, but he is in the realm of Vrindavan. His mental state is in Vrindavan, where he's constantly thinking, oh, Yashoda Maya must be, if Yashoda Maya at this point of time is feeding Krishna, so let me also offer bhoga to Krishna. So his impetus of following bhakti and the principles of bhakti is one of Rajvasi. For example, the one in Vatsalya Ras, Yashoda Maya specifically here. So therefore, so this is an authorized way in which, this is an authorized tradition, an authorized way by the virtue of which you can approach Krishna. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Anvay Prabhu, in chain, that logo. So, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood that this method was prematurely being adopted by many people, especially the Babajis, and as a result of which, the premature adoption of this method was not bringing the right purification in the heart of the sadhakas. And that is the reason the Gaudiya Math logo is very, very unique. The Gaudiya Math logo conveys what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur stood for. So if you see the logo, can we magnify it? Are all the devotees able to see? So, okay, wonderful. So this is the logo of Gaudiya Math. Let us try to understand this logo. So on the right side, you have Radha Krishna. Below that is written Raga. And on the left side, you have Lakshmi Narayan. And below that is written Vidhi. So the understanding that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave is that in order to be able to reach Rag Marg, you first of all need to worship Radha Krishna in the mood of Lakshmi Narayan. With the help of the Pancharatra scriptures, can you see the top? The Pancharatra scriptures, and the Pancharatra scriptures contains what? The Pancharatrika Vidhi, which is a representation of, if you go down, the deity paraphernalia, you can see, the bell and the lamp. So that is what the Pancharatrika Vidhi, and Pancharatra Shastras and the Bhagavad Shastras, specifically the Bhagavad Puran. Because what is the Bhagavad Puran consist of? The Bhagavad Vidhi. And the Bhagavad Vidhi, Bhagavad Vidhi is presentation. It's presented by Shravanam and Kirtanam. So therefore, can you see? You have the Mridang symbol there, which represents Kirtanam. And can anyone tell me what is the symbol besides the Mridang? It is a printing press. This is the Brihad Mridanga. That is what our Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did. So Brihad Mridanga, so that represents Shravanam. By the printing press, you produce so many literatures by the virtue of which you can preach, and you yourself can get nourished from the scriptures. So the way of Ragamarg is, you have to go compulsorily, you have to approach Radha Krishna in the mood of Lakshmi Narayan and through the Pancharatra and Bhagavad Shastras. So very, very comprehensive logo, and this is, and in which, the principles that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur stood for are enshrined here. So this was what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, taught us. So therefore, this is a very, very graphical logo. That's why he would say, in a very, very famous statement, Pujala Raga Pantha Gaurava Bhange. Yes, Ragamarg is worshipable. We worship it. But Gaurava Bhange. But how do we approach this path of Ragamarg? Through the mood of awe and reverence. So this is a very, very important aspect of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, of that Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. So when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saw people prematurely trying to adopt to this path of Ragmarg, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was like a lion. He was so strong. Practically, because of taking such strong stands, in his public lectures, in his instructions to disciples, there was a rupture that was created by those people who were the part of the upper sampradayas and between Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Now, at that point of time, to that extent, the rupture had reached such a situation that they were attempted murders. People would want to kill Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. To that extent, the caste brahmanas gave, what do you call supari? Gave bribe. I forgot the word. Gave bribe. To the police that I want you to kill Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And police would go to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and told them that I was given a bribe to kill you. Please run away from this place. That was the extent. Not only that, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would give Harinam initiation, would give Brahman Diksha to those people who were not qualified by birth. And therefore, on 29th January 1925, when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was going on a Gaur Mandal Parikrama, what from the terrace, suddenly there were attacks of stones and bricks. And there was one disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the sannyas guru of our Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Pragyakesha Swami Maharaj. During the attack, he took Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur into a room and threatened this Gurudev that you should give me your sannyas dress, your staff and your spectacles, and you wear my white cloth and I will go. And there he was profusely attacked. But when he returned back to the Gaudiya Mutt, he fell at the feet of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and told them that I came back alive. Oh Gurudev, please forgive me. I could not give up my life for you. And Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was crying tears. Was practically crying tears. So this is the glory. This is the glory of a glorious disciple who belonged to a glorious master. So that was Bhakti Pragyakesha Maharaj. So that was the intensity at that point of time. Because of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's very strong condemnation of those people who took up to Rag Marg and Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur also, and the caste Brahmanas who condemned Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur for prematurely, not prematurely, for giving Brahman Diksha to those people. So that's why it had really caused a, scene there. So therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, he wanted to create a system where he did not want devotees to fall prematurely by the adoption of this Rag Marg. And therefore he wanted to create a systematic structure wherein people would get a forum where they would be able to practice bhakti. And this what brings us to the third point. What is the third point I talked about? In the 5 aspects? Institutionalization. So, bhakti, we know that there are 3 things like Sambandha, Abhidheya and Prayojan. For all our acharyas, the Sambandha is the same. What is the meaning of Sambandha? How do we establish our relationship with Krishna? What is philosophical knowledge of who we are, what is God, and what is the means, what is our relationship with Krishna? That is Sambandha. And then what is Abhidheya? Abhidheya is basically the process by virtue of which you can approach, the process or the means by which you can approach Krishna. And Prayojan. Prayojan is the ultimate goal of love of Godhead. So now, Sambandha and Prayojan is same. But what differs amongst the acharyas, as I said in the beginning, was the Abhidheya. So in general, the acharyas have shown a lot of innovativeness in Abhidheya. How we can connect with Krishna, can differ according to time, place and circumstances. And there is a direct reference for this in the scriptures. Yena kena prakarena manah Krishna niveshayat. Vidhi nished asyur etayor eva kinkara. Somehow or the other, have your mind fixed on Krishna. And whatever principles that we see in scriptures is basically should be subservient to this principle of somehow absorbing your mind in Krishna. So therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur brought about this revolutionary system of institutionalization, wherein he created a forum where devotees can practice bhakti. And this was something which was not seen before at all, this process of institutionalization. For nearly, if you see Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, for nearly 10 years he had done solitary bhajan, chanting Hare Krishna, intensely. And during his bhajan, he had a very mystical vision of Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj, of his own father Bhakti Vinod Thakur, the 6 Goswamis, Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, who came to Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur in a mystical vision and instructed him that now it is time to go and spread this message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Do not worry. All the facilities, all that is required in order to preach this message, you will be bestowed all blessings. Something very, very similar to which our Srila Prabhupada, he had also got a vision when he was in the Jaladuta, all the incarnations of Krishna came to him, ensuring him, even Rup Goswami ensured him that you will be successful in your mission. So this was something very, very similar, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, had got, where he was instructed that now it's time, you go and share your vision. So if you see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, till 1900, he played, he was primarily a student, and a seeker, where he was trying to understand other sampradayas. He would go to the Govardhan Mutt, which was a Mayavadi Mutt, try to understand their philosophy. He even went to the south in order to understand the Madhva philosophy and the Shri Sampradaya. So he did a lot of research. And then from 1919 to 1937 is the time where Gaudiya Vaishnavism exploded. That is where so much preaching took place by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and his disciples. So traditionally, coming back to the point of institutionalization, the Vedic institutionalization was very, very loose. Very, very loose. There at that point, there was something called as a soft institutionalization. Means there were some broad principles, but there was no body or committee who would ensure those principles are being followed. So that is soft institutionalization. And there is something called as hard institutionalization, wherein you have a body, you have a forum, and every decision that needs to take place has to go through that body. That body decides, and then it is percolated down the hierarchy. That is what was something missing. Now, for example, if a wealthy person, a wealthy person, when he owns a company, he owns an organization, what does he normally do? He appoints a successor. Correct? He writes his will. He creates a forum by the virtue of which his legacy can be carried through. Correct? But when Shriman Mahaprabhu did not do anything of this sort. He did not create an institution. Neither he appointed successors. Neither he wrote any books. The only thing that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wrote was the 8 verses of Shikshashtakam. That's all he wrote. But he never wrote any books, telling what his will is. So therefore, it is said, how Gaudiya Vaishnavism survived was actually just by Mahaprabhu's mercy. And therefore, this was something that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, brought about. So when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, when he tried to institutionalize things, especially when Britishers, previously when Britishers had come, now just giving a historical background, when Britishers had come to Bengal the first time, Gaur-Nitai deities were household deities at practically each and every home. And Gaur-Nitai worship was very, very famous. There was no home where you would not find Gaur-Nitai deities. But there was a rupture. There was a misunderstanding between popular Gaudiya Vaishnavism and scriptural Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And what was being followed at that point of time in Bengal was popular Gaudiya Vaishnavism. What was popular Gaudiya Vaishnavism? Means people would have bead bag, they would have kantimala, they would have tilak on their foreheads, and at the same time they would go into the fish market and purchase fish. This was popular Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And so bead bag in one hand and fish in another hand. So that was, that was the understanding of, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and that became very, very popular. It would be so common for people on the streets chanting, and people would love to chant. And therefore, Gaudiya Vaishnavism was appreciated and respected by the common people. But in the eyes of the educated people, people were, what kind of people they are. The Gaudiya Vaishnavism is totally bogus. So in order to bring back respectability, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur worked very, very hard. And of course, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was the one who started the system of bringing an institute. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was already a very respected personality in, because he was a grahastha, and being a grahastha, he was also magistrate. So therefore, he very easily integrated into the mainstream society. And he also did extensive preaching, no doubt about it, but his preaching was confined only within the pockets of Odisha and Bengal. But whereas Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he wanted to do extensive preaching throughout the nation, throughout India and beyond. So therefore, it was very necessary for Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur to create an institute. Though many a times Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did say that institutionalization can choke the spirit many a times, because when you have an institute, you have management, and sometimes, when you are managing, it sometimes becomes very difficult to be very, very Krishna conscious, because you have to deal sometimes, even within an institute, a spiritual institute, there may be some, misunderstandings. There can be sometimes, it can even go up to quarrels. So therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur understood that it can be a one minor setback, but it is a very effective means through which one can carry the legacy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Let us try to understand this aspect of institutionalization through a metaphor. You have seen, on a mountain you have, thin streams of water coming, correct? They are called tricklets in English. Thin streams of water. But tributaries and thin streams of waters coming from the mountain, they finally go into the river, correct? And the river ultimately goes into the ocean. So the thin tricklets of water can be compared to people having the spiritual urge, and the river can be compared to institutionalization. So when many tricklets of water come together, or many people who come together who have a spiritual urge, they come together and form an institute, so that they can collectively come together and perform bhakti in order to be able to reach their ultimate goal of going back to Godhead, which is compared to the ocean. But if there was no river, if there was no institution, most of the tricklets would descend down from the mountain, would get dried up and would die off. Now, the tricklet would need a good thrust, a good powerful force by the virtue of which they can reach the ocean. That can be compared to those individuals who had a lot of spiritual thirst. Like, for example, Radhanath Maharaj. Now, he had that inner calling where he was looking for God. In most of our cases, devotees came searching for us. We were not going looking for God. So therefore, when such tricklets and tributaries come together, form a river in the form of an institution, then to facilitate the prayojan of going back to God, it becomes very, very easy. So therefore, that is a Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur brought this institutionalization. So this was very, very necessary. So this was the third aspect of institutionalization, which was a very important aspect of his outreach. Then the fourth aspect is his use of technology. Even Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he also used technology. At that point of time, he used the train. But Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was very, very radical in his way of approaching technology. Practically, in Bengal, there were only two people who owned a Rolls Royce. One was the governor of Bengal, and the other was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. No one in Bengal owned a Rolls Royce. And he did attract a lot of criticism for it. But over a period of time, when people saw the genuine practice, the purity, and the devotion of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and his followers, they understood. They were very, very genuine. And therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur is a perfect example of as to how to apply this principle of Yukta Vairagya. Anasaktasya Vishayan Yatha Yunjam Yatha Artham Upayunjayitam Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yukta Vairagyam Uchyate. So the first principle of Yukta Vairagya, in order to be able to engage material objects in Krishna service, the first principle is that you yourself have to inculcate Vairagya. Only then you can apply the principle of Yukta Vairagya. First, you should be detached from the material sense object. Only then they can be engaged. So this was something which Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur brought about. And he believed that if you just simply renounce the things of this world, then you are berefting Krishna from its due glory. Krishna has given material elements, and those material elements can be engaged in Krishna service. And this was one philosophy that Srila Prabhupada, that our Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur would time and time repeat again and again, as mentioned by Bhakti Vikas Maharaj. So this was the fourth aspect of his use of technology. Now the fifth aspect was, anyone remembers? The use of language. The use of contemporary language, especially English. So Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's vocabulary was something which you cannot understand at all. Practically, even Britishers would have to look up into a dictionary to understand what Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur is saying. That was his vocabulary. It was like practically impossible. If you read Brahma Samhita, try to read the first paragraph and tell me, did you understand ever anything? I never ever understood anything. That was Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's, his IQ, his intelligentsia, and his vocabulary. Even if you see Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, primarily he wrote most of his literatures, in 3 languages, but mostly it was primarily in Bengali and Sanskrit. And Brahma Samhita was one amongst those books which he wrote in English. Now, with respect to preaching in the West, in the English language, so let us, go into that a little bit. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's, when he wanted to preach in the Western countries, especially the European countries, he never brought Lord Krishna in the forefront. Never ever. That is why you will see Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur never used Bhagavad Gita as a way and means to preach. Even Indians, especially the foreigners, he never used Bhagavad Gita at all. Bhagavatam also, he introduced it much later. Why? The reason is, when the Britishers had come into India, they were very much fascinated by the Indian culture. Very, very fascinated. And especially, but as their colonial and religious motives came about, religious motives I mean, when they wanted to convert the Indians into Christianity, at that point of time, how do I explain? They had attacked 2 gods. That is, one is Krishna and one is Kali. And what did they say about Kali? Oh, Kali is the god of brutality. What kind of god are you following? And Krishna is the god of immorality. He is not the god to be followed. So therefore, the Britishers, they took primarily these 2 deities and spread poison amongst in the Vedic tradition. So therefore, why was I making this point? So that is the reason Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur in his Western outreach never brought Krishna in the forefront, because Krishna already had a bad reputation, amongst the Britishers, as a god of immorality, unfortunately. So therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur needed people with mentalities having a clean slate. So therefore, he introduced Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, before introducing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had asked one of his disciples, who was a professor. The name of his disciple was, Nishikant Sanyal, who was a professor in India in one university called the Ravenshaw University, created by the Britishers themselves. But he wrote a book, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, which formed a fulcrum for his preaching in the Western outreach. And therefore, he instructed his followers specifically that when you're going to Europe, you should go yourselves identifying as devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, you should use the teachings of Mahaprabhu in order to transform the Europeans. So that was Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, brought about. Yeah. So, yeah. So, this was his, the use of, this was how he started his Western outreach. So, one aspect of institutionalization that I wanted to, so there's one point I wanted to make here is, yes, so on the other hand, if you see our Srila Prabhupada, he used Bhagavad Gita as a main literature. So many a times you would hear Srila Prabhupada saying that I just simply followed what my spiritual master did. But you will see that there were many radical things and differences, that Prabhupada introduced, which was something very different from which Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur did. Like for example, if Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur used Chaitanya Charitamrita as his fulcrum for his preaching, our Prabhupada used Bhagavad Gita. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would encourage his disciples to dress in the Western attire. He would really encourage. But Prabhupada would prefer his disciples, when they would go out for book distribution, they would have shaven heads and wear the traditional Vaishnava attire of dhoti kurta. So when Prabhupada would say that I just simply followed what my spiritual master did, Prabhupada actually took the essence. But there were many radical things that Prabhupada even did which differed from Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. So this is, how the statement should be understood. He took the essence and the principles, but the details in which, the principles were implemented varies from Acharya to Acharya. So this is something very, very important. And so therefore, this is how, how Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur used English as a means, to propagate his message of love of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One aspect of institutionalization which I wanted to cover, the time is already up, this is the last point, his formation of GBC. One legacy of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur that Srila Prabhupada implemented was the formation of the governing body commission. Now where did this concept of the GBC came about? It actually came about from the railways. Indians, when the Britishers had introduced the railway system, the Indians were really fascinated by it. They were thinking, how do you have one rail and there are 100 trains going over that rail, without, cutting, like we see on Indian roads, you in order to get into the other lane, you cut the other vehicle and then you go ahead. But you don't see anything here in the Indian railways. How is that? And therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, he also appreciated this concept. And he understood that good level of sophistication and management is required to able to operate something called as the railways. And therefore, he studied it and understood that there was a body called the GBC. And even the Indian railways are divided into zones. And this is where the idea came about of the GBC. And that is why when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur in his last, when he was winding up his divine Leela on this earth, he instructed his disciples to form the GBC. Now, it's not that, we should not misunderstand that disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur did not follow the instructions, they tried. After 10 days of his disappearance, they did form a GBC. But their minds and their minds could not conceive, because in the Vedic tradition, you have the monarchy kind of structure, where you have one person and everyone follows that one person, like for a king, the time of Parikshit Maharaj, Yudhishthira Maharaj, and even within a spiritual organization, you have one person, the Mathapati, whose instruction you would follow. So for the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it was something so inconceivable. How do you implement this idea? Because Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur never gave, he gave this instruction, but he never gave details as to how to implement this instruction of forming a GBC. He never gave this thing. So therefore, in Gaudiya Math, they had appointed one person, but somehow or the other, that person had some spiritual difficulties. and he could not maintain his spiritual position. And that is what created a wave of faithlessness in the Gaudiya Mutt, and the entire institution crumbled. That is what happened. And for Prabhupada, this was a very traumatic experience, where he was seeing that there was a dispute amongst his own god brothers. That's why Prabhupada in Leelamrit, there is a very famous Vyas Puja, where Prabhupada is calling for his god brother, come, let's unite and once again create the same momentum in which Gaudiya Vaishnavism used to get preached in the times of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He urged everyone, but unfortunately, that message fell onto deaf ears. And that's why Prabhupada, in 1966, he came to America. In 1970, he formed GBC. But that GBC he formed was under his close mentorship. Every detail. That's why every year, Prabhupada would conduct something called as the GBC meetings in Mayapur. So that he would ensure that any decision he is made aware of, and he can give corrections at the right point of time, so that the GBCs don't deviate. So Prabhupada, he himself monitored the GBC. And that is why do you see, even after Prabhupada's disappearance from this planet, ISKCON is growing. We had 108 centers. Now practically we have 800, 900 centers and temples all around the world. That is because of the formation of this body of the GBC. So this was something which Prabhupada introduced and followed this, implemented this instruction. One last concluding point, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj compares Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to Vamandev. How? Where he did not take 3 steps over Bali, but he took 3 steps over Kali. How? His first step, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he kicked out atheism. With his second step, he kicked out impersonalism. Practically, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was so strong against impersonalism. Sometimes impersonalists would go, when they would be going on the same road, and when they would see Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur there, they would take a U-turn and take the next road. And Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, he would get very angry. And purposely, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur would take the other route, catch those fellows, and literally shake them by their shoulders. You have a personal form, and you deny that you do not come from a personal form. So people would get really scared of his personality. And therefore, he was called Simha Guru. He was called the Lion Guru. And therefore, they were forced to first surrender to the personal form of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. And then they would accept, yes, there is a personal form called Krishna. That was a roaring preaching of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So that was the second step. He kicked out impersonalism. And with the third step, the rigid principles of Vaidehi Bhakti, he gave a proper understanding. He gave a proper understanding of the following of the Vaidehi Bhakti, and once again re-established the proper understanding of Rag Marg. In this way, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur very expertly, kicked out, Kali, through these 3 major steps that he took. So let us, at this point of time, pray to Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, that just like the way Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, he was a spiritual warrior, wherein he created a spiritual revolution in the hearts of all the living entities, and he gave us ways and means in order to fight the illusion, the forces of Maya. Let us pray to him, to get spiritual strength, so that we can, burn the fire of the anarthas that is, within our heart, and, steadily progress, in the way and manner that Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur expected us to, and achieve life's perfection of going home back to Godhead. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.